Hello, welcome to the Charity Impact Podcast, where we aim to help you increase your charity's income and impact by sharing the experience and expertise of our guests. I'm Alex Blake, your podcast host, and I'm joined today by Rob Laycock, who alongside Stephanie Cole is co-founder of Yes We Can Community Kick. Rob's background is in the arts and social change, previously being CEO of Helix Arts, and for the last 10 years or so, I think, supporting the voluntary sector in the Northeast as a consultant, facilitator, coach. And with colleagues has set up Northeast Together, the network for leaders of social change, which I have to say is the best network I've ever been a part of due to the excellent facilitation of the events there by Rob and Stephanie and others, and also the sort of very intentional approach that they've taken to what that network can do for social leaders and for the sector. Also, another initiative from Rob and Stephanie I want to mention, and I think I've done a couple of times on the podcast before, it's the Northeast Coaching Collective. They gave people from that network the opportunity to qualify as coaches, and then that group now offers affordable coaching to leaders of small charities in the Northeast. So I think if you are in the region, that's something definitely worth being aware of. So today we're going to be discussing leadership, looking at people development, creating great teams, some of the things you might want to invest in for your people when resources are tight, and when you're thinking about how you support your people development. So welcome to the podcast, Rob. How are you today? How was that intro? How many things did I get wrong?
That was an extremely good intro, Alex. I appreciate that. I'm feeling suitably flattered, and it made my job a bit easier in terms of starting to explain the work we do and the reason why we approach that work. So thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. Really looking forward to the conversation.
No problem. So, feel free to give any sort of background context and stuff before we get into detail if you want, or we can just kind of jump straight in. So, first of all, I suppose the aim to develop social leadership, thinking about developing people, where shall we start? I haven't got a very good first question. Why don't you start us off, and then I'll actually come up with some real questions.
Sure. Shall I just add in a little more detail on the focus of our work at the moment and over the last 3 years? Interestingly, we've just come to the end of our third year of trading as a community interest company. So we're doing lots of kind of reflection and looking back as well as planning ahead. So as you mentioned, Yes We Can's a community interest company. We formed formally in the middle of lockdown, actually on the 1st of September 2020, we started trading. And the focus of the work is everything kind of hangs off this idea of social leadership. And I suppose for us, and very much inspired by one of our speakers at Northeast Together, George Thompson, this idea of kind of leadership, the verb, rather than leadership, the noun, or leaders, the noun. So leadership being the things that we need to do, that need organising, that need to happen in our context to make our region a better place for everyone to live and work. So I guess everything kind of hangs off that. And I suppose then the things that we focus on at the moment in terms of, well, if that's what we're about, what types of things are we driving? What types of things are we providing for people, for those people, particularly in the Northeast, and focus particularly on the voluntary community social enterprise sector. So I think that hangs around leadership and management development. I think there's a fairly chronic lack of opportunities for people to take time out of their busy day jobs in the sector to think about their own leadership and management within their context. So that's a mix of open programs. We run a couple of those a year, internal programs, particularly with bigger organizations, and also tailored programs linked to specific initiatives. And one of those was with the Northeast Youth Alliance fairly recently, who have a focus around workforce development, which I know is something that we're going to be focusing on to some extent today. Then this whole chunk of interest around coaching, linked to that mentoring and action learning. They have lots of things in common for people who are involved with and sort of passionate about those kind of spaces for conversation and exploration and kind of taking action and moving forward. So lots of things in there. You've mentioned the coach training. You've mentioned the Northeast Coaching Collective. And I guess that's all about, moving towards more of a coaching culture in our sector in the Northeast, and what is our contribution to that? How can we contribute to that sort of shift in way of being together in teams, in organisations and across organisations? We've then got a big chunk of interest and work around charity governance. It's essential to get governance right. We all know it's a challenge. Great when it's good. Hard work when it's not going quite so well for everybody, to be honest, for chief execs, for teams, and for trustees volunteering their time in there. So there's work to do to think about and support trustees and governance, particularly small organisations that typically struggle to appoint and retain trustees in the first place. As you've mentioned, an interest in networks and collaboration, a real passion for collaboration, I think, in our work. Lots I could say about that, but I won't because I know it's not the subject of the podcast. And also in all of that, kind of one-to-one support to individual organisations. So there's a mix of things going on there. We're probably working with 8 to 12 to 15 organisations a year, and it might be touching on any number of those things, but bespoke to them, their context and the work that they're doing. So I guess that's us as a whole. Interestingly, because we're going to talk about being our best at work, we each work 3 days a week. Work-life balance is really important to us. So together, myself and Stephanie, we're working 6 days a week between the two of us. And we're pretty hard on that. So we're not overworking. We're not kind of saying one thing and doing another thing. Anybody who knows me knows that this is a hobby horse of mine. So I'm going to shut up about it. Just to sort of say that's the scale of organisation we are, by design, by intent. And that's to do with our motivations, interests, but it's also to do with our own kind of health and well-being and work-life balance and those types of things, which I think is really key. And I think people struggle to get that stuff right.
Yeah, I guess we'll probably come on to that a little bit as well in the conversation, so you can get back onto your hobby horse for maybe a few minutes at least. So, I mean, what are some of the sort of challenges and opportunities typically when people are thinking about sort of workforce, whether it's workforce development or thinking about their teams, thinking about themselves as leaders, and as you say, maybe it's chief execs, maybe it's trustees, maybe it's thinking about managers or wider teams. What are some of the sort of challenges and opportunities around that?
Yeah. So again, I guess because this year, in fact, this month, I suppose I'm kind of 30 years into my career, and I think the older you get, you sort of look back and you sort of see the patterns in your own career and your work and the opportunities you had and have continued to have and all those types of things. It gives you that sort of perspective. It's quite interesting to do some of that, looking back and looking at patterns and trends. So I suppose for me, I would kind of broadly say, I feel like I've been doing leadership and management for about 30 years. I would say I've been thinking about it and kind of studying it probably for about 20 years. And I think in the last decade, a little bit more than a decade, I've been kind of sharing that thinking with others. So I suppose the work we're doing now, for me personally, kind of draws on all that doing and all that thinking, and now that kind of sharing and engaging people with what's going on for them and what would be helpful for them. So because of that, and working with people like Stephanie and other people like Kath Brown, who's also a founder of Yes We Can, it's kind of brilliant people doing incredible work and layering in their experience alongside my own. We've done quite a lot of thinking and work around what this all means, because there's loads of stuff out there. You can Google leadership and management. It's been going on forever. You can do MBAs, you can do PhDs on this stuff. Where do you sort of start, I suppose? What's the kind of way in, particularly for smaller organisations, hard pressed with time, those types of things, which tend to be the focus of our work, smaller charities in particular, sub-1 million pound turnover, certainly. How do we kind of make this stuff interesting and accessible and sort of available, this sort of huge body of work and ideas and theories and practice? So to help with that, we can share that. I'm sure there's mechanisms after the podcast, Alex, to share resources and links to things. So we'll follow this up with links to those things that I'm going to kind of mention a bit, so people have got some kind of practical stuff they can sort of look at.
Yeah, we'll have a dedicated web page where we can list out the resources and things. So all of that stuff would be great.
Great. Thanks, Alex. So where we're at the moment, we think about it in 3 ways, and we call them best self, great teams, and amazing together. And they kind of do what they say on the tin. And they are sort of within each other, if that makes sense. So I suppose if we're thinking about our leadership, we're thinking about management, we're thinking about being in a team, leading organizations, all that kind of stuff, which is the work of our sector, work of our organizations. We've kind of boiled it down to these three ideas. It starts with self and being our best self at work, not being perfect, not beating ourselves up about the stuff that we struggle with or aren't our preferences, but, aspiring to do our best work, aspiring to be our best self at work for the purposes of the work and the team and those types of things. So I'll mention a little bit about our best self framework. I'll also mention a little bit about our great teams framework. We're not going to talk about amazing together because that's more in the collaboration realm. And I think in the conversation of today, we're thinking more within organizations. We're thinking about me within that organization, and we're thinking about how I'm operating within that team, especially if I'm in a leadership position where I can influence and create space for culture, for good cultures, for teams, for people to sort of thrive when I have that kind of authority and I have that ability to do that. I think that's particularly important.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think collaboration is such a big topic. We can easily do it. I mean, you could do a whole podcast series, let alone episode on that. So maybe that's something we'll come back to another time. Let's start with this topic of best self. And I guess that's where I thought maybe we'll come back to some of your hobby horse stuff as well, because I suppose there's part of that has to be that sort of personal sort of self-care and things like that as well. So you come into work in the right sort of frame of mind and all of those sorts of things. So why don't you take us through some of those kind of aspects that you look at in that sort of best self module, if that's the right sort of term?
Yeah, so we have a framework, we have a self-assessment tool, we have a learning resource, and we have a kind of PDP, so a kind of professional development tool, if you like, if you use that sort of language. So I'm not going to read out everything that's in both of these frameworks because that's going to take up too much time. And we're going to share the link to the framework so people can have a look at everything and get that sense. So what I've decided to do today is focus on what I think are kind of key in each of these areas. So sort of take the framework and all the things we think are important and see if I can get that down a bit more, just so that we can get to the essence. If we haven't got time for all these things, what might we find time for, and I think that's always a challenge, is finding time for this stuff and finding a resource to do it if it's cost money. It doesn't, and lots of things don't have to cost money, but sometimes they do. So I'm not going to mention all of them. Our best self framework has 9 elements. We'll share the framework so you can have a look at that in your own time. It does start with looking after self. So there is a whole kind of area around health, well-being, sort of resilience. I know we have some mixed feelings on the word resilience. I do too. I think it's kind of a bit misappropriated sometimes or overused. But I think all we're saying is that kind of looking after self, how good are we at it? What do I need to look after myself? What does a typical week look like for me? How do I feel well so I can be my best in the organization? Again, not about being perfect, but just making sure that, I'm arriving at work, having looked after myself, good night's sleep, good nutrition, hopefully some exercise, good connection with friends and family, and probably. So a whole section on that. I think really interesting. So my top 3, I would say in there, which I wouldn't include looking after self, although it's massively important and it's right at the front of our framework. I think self-awareness is really key in terms of being your best self. I think linked to self-awareness, emotional intelligence. So if people have looked at emotional intelligence, which has been around a few decades now, I think that's really key. So knowing yourself, knowing your preferences, knowing your strengths, knowing the things you're less good at, but also what comes with the emotional intelligence focus is kind of self-regulation and sort of self-control. So I suppose what I mean by that is, how well do I know myself? How well do I understand my emotions and where they come from? So that when I'm interacting with others, particularly within the organization, I'm bringing that awareness, working more effectively with people, I think, because of that awareness, that self-regulation aspect of it, of EQ, emotional intelligence, often shorthanded to EQ, I think is really interesting. And again, we don't always get it right. We can't always do it, but that sort of just enough awareness to know that actually this is something going on for me today. I'm not going to bring that to this other person. Or I'm not going to bring that to this team because it's not about us, and it's not about the situation. It's my thing that I need to sort of process and work with. Alongside that, in the EQ framework is social awareness. So this is about kind of empathy in particular. So reading the emotions of others, having an interest in how people are, kind of all that stuff. And there's we'll put links into emotional intelligence. There's all sorts of self-assessments you can do. There's all sorts of exercises you can do. There's a common error in thinking that says, oh, some people are just more emotionally intelligent than others. Kind of not true. Yes, some people are perhaps a bit more naturally empathetic, but we can all work on our emotional intelligence. It's not a good enough excuse to say, oh, well, I'm not very emotionally. So there's work we can kind of do around that. So I think I would put self-awareness and EQ together as a kind of key area for individuals to have a look at, and particularly for leaders. We don't have self-aware leaders that don't have high levels of EQ. I think we're in all sorts of trouble. So I think with all this stuff, I kind of think there's an obvious additional responsibility for those in positions of leadership and management responsible for teams to really be walking the talk of this stuff, even if not, kind of more so than others in the team. They've got to be leading by example. They've got to be, kind of walking the talk of this stuff. Or what do we expect? What's that culture going to be like? What's that teamwork going to be like? I'll go through a couple more pretty quickly. Not going into a great deal of depth with being organised and effective. Interesting one. We've had a few conversations about this over the years, Alex. Interesting. Again, not about being perfect. Not about, none of this is about being perfect, nor beating ourselves up about the things we're not naturally great at. But I think it's reasonable for us to be organised in our work when working with other people. And again, if we're leaders and managers and we're a bit unreliable, if we're a bit disorganized, sometimes with these things, if you think about the opposite, have you ever worked with a manager who's disorganized?
Once or twice.
It's madness, isn't it? It's hard, it's hard work. So lead by example.
And it's often basic stuff, isn't it? That it kind of leads to either being organized or disorganized, isn't it? It's kind of the two main kind of bugbears that I'll bang on about will be like emails and meetings. Be organized in those two areas and you will be more effective overall. Don't get distracted by email pings and stuff. Just turn them off when you're trying to focus on something, and just run good meetings, make effective meetings, rather than, these long things that kind of ramble on and don't get anywhere, or have really long agendas so you don't get through the half of the items that you need to, or all of that kind of stuff. But we'll not do an episode on that.
There are a couple of great. I think there are a couple of great tips, and I would agree with you. If you just focused on doing two things differently, that would be a good place to start, I think. My next area is communication. Kind of everything, isn't it? I think the more under pressure we are, the more uncertainty there is. All the research, all the data says it gets even harder. So, and we've had all sorts of challenges to cope with over the last 3 years. So it's got even harder, and people, the likelihood of our kind of messaging, our communication landing as intended, even less likely. So work to do around communication, recognizing all the stuff that gets in the way of people hearing what we're trying to communicate and send. So we've got to have heard people talk about over communicating, checking, getting feedback, just not assuming. And again, email can be a terrible, and all the other sort of messaging apps that we have nowadays can be a terribly reductive way of communicating with people, but very, very popular. Lacking nuance, lacking all sorts of things. It might ping in your box from your boss, but what does that mean? And where's it coming from? And have I done something wrong? And how do I feel about it? Oh, that's making me feel a bit anxious. I'm not quite sure what they want, but I don't want to ask, so I don't want to come across as feeling a bit silly, So communication and work around communication as a team, having protocols and all sorts of stuff work to do there. So I think in terms of self, I'd pick those out. There are other things. I think if my colleague was here, she'd be talking about vulnerability, trust, and courage. I think that's really important. I think, and again, for leaders, being able to show vulnerability in a way that's sort of appropriate, being able to kind of build trust, being trustworthy. It's that kind of classic stuff, isn't it? A kind of lifetime to build and a moment to break. So encourage if we're in this space and we're trying to make a difference, it's going to be challenging at times, to say the least. If we're doing things that nobody else is doing because they're important to get done, we're going to need some courage. We're going to need to push forward with things, for years, not months or weeks. So vulnerability, trust, and courage, I think, would be another of our maybe top 4 or 5 things within that framework. So I've tried to kind of just draw out what I think are most important. I think self-awareness, EQ, if you've not come across it before, have a look at it. I think it's really interesting. Lots of material around that because it's been around a couple of decades.
Yeah, it seems to me like almost all of those other things kind of hang off of that emotional intelligence one. And I don't know if that's just because I'm using it as a shorthand for more than what it is, but it seems like, for example, with the kind of communication one, it seems like if you've worked on the emotional intelligence side of things and then, you're bringing that awareness of yourself and your awareness of other people and their sort of preferences and things like that, then if then the communication is kind of the practical application of that awareness, then it kind of flows from that, and some of the other things you mentioned as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's a big one, isn't it? I suppose it's one of those things that in many ways, I suppose, has probably, as you say, it's been around for a couple of decades, the idea, and lots of kind of work on it, but it maybe gets sort of less emphasis when people think about leadership and they're thinking about strategy, and when they, you think about management, and it's been more about the kind of harder structured kind of sides of it rather than that sort of emotional intelligence side of things. So I suppose lots of leaders in the sector will have done sort of leadership courses a long time ago, and not so much recently. So I suppose there's maybe sometimes a bit of a lack of having spent time really looking at that emotional intelligence side of things as part of your role as a CEO or whatever role it might be in an organization. So yeah, it seems like such an important one. And as you say, that you need your leaders to be exhibiting those behaviors that you want the rest of your team to be demonstrating as well in their work. So
yeah, definitely. I think, if there was, and I suppose that, that example you get there of, I did my training forever ago and I kind of drifted, but I guess the self-awareness would say I need to be continually learning and developing. And that's another thing I need to model, and that is in our framework as well. I just haven't highlighted it. So I guess that self-awareness would say, if I'm in that leadership position, I am also investing in my development, and I'm, not questioning, but sort of making sure that I'm kind of growing and developing. I'm not just relying on that course I did however many years ago. For me, that was 2001 or 2, not just sat back and kind of relying on my management diploma. It would be very rusty, wouldn't it? So I think that's self-awareness says.
I think you see those two different types of leaders, don't you? Not to kind of pigeonhole people completely, but you see leaders saying those things. You get some people who are like, oh well, yeah, I've done an MBA. It doesn't matter that it's 20 years ago or whatever it is that they've done. They're kind of like, yeah, I've done that. I've been a leader for 30 years now. I've done this, that, and the other. I kind of know it all. And then you also have the leaders that do talk more about that kind of continuous process of learning and developing, and they're learning from other members of the team and other members of the community and the sector and that sort of thing, and completely different language. And as you say, it's partly that awareness, but it's quite interesting when you witness it, isn't it? When you perhaps are in environments where there are a number of different leaders and you hear those kind of different ways of talking, you can really kind of pick up on some of those things.
Definitely.
Yeah, hopefully there's a trend towards that kind of, recognizing the value of learning and, continuous learning, and also thinking about some of those things like emotional intelligence, as well as that sort of more like, how do I do a strategy? How do I manage people? But also thinking about some of those other things as well. That maybe brings us on to thinking about the team's side of things. So as leaders, if we've done some of that work on ourselves, then how can we create great teams?
Yes, so I've gone through a similar process. Again, we've done some deep work on this, and we've created our own kind of great teams framework. So that comes with a self-assessment tool, an extensive learning resource, and a kind of team development planner, if you like. So I'm not going to mention all the elements of the framework. Currently has 10 elements, actually, but we are revising it down to 9 because we think the first 2 are probably the same. But nine elements in there, and we'll share that so you can have a look at everything. But again, taking this approach of what's the essence of great teamwork. And and this isn't just for people kind of leading teams, leading organizations. I think this is for anybody in a team. If you want to work effectively in a team, we need a sort of shared responsibility for the work that we do together. We can't just default to the leader or the manager or whoever they may be facilitating the activity, making it happen, resourcing it, but we all have a responsibility. So just go around these. I think this will take a little less time because you'll hear some themes coming through again. So sort of reinforce what we've already said. Kind of first on our list, dead obvious, shared purpose and goals.
Just a thought before we will get into all of them, Rob, as well. Like when we talk about teams, I think people might have a perception of what we mean by team, but maybe you can explain what you would envisage teams referring to.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think there's definitely a scale thing here. So I think bear in mind with our focus being voluntary community social enterprise sector and Northeast and sub £1 million. We do work with larger charities, but our heart and soul, if you like, or our kind of energy or our sort of drive and passion around this stuff is where we think there's least opportunity for people, which we think is in the smaller organizations. And the smaller you get, we're going to have a look at some data in a little while. The data says the smaller you get, the less likely it is you're going to have kind of budgets and opportunities for training and development.
The other thing I was just thinking as well, so I suppose when I think of teams, there's like the team as in you might be in small organizations, you're probably not in a fundraising team, but you might be in this service team, or you might be in the finance team, or, there's those teams, there's the whole organization staff as one big team. And then I think there are those sort of more fluid sort of teams in that, like if I'm working as a fundraiser and also working with the chief exec of organization and maybe the service manager and the finance manager, then we're a team on that project we're working on, which might be like project design, bid development kind of processes. So I think there were like all of that stuff about creating great teams. It's not just in the formal structures, but then also in you get a group of people together to do a thing, whether it's might be running a great meeting, might be developing a funding bid, whatever it might be, then that's also a team in my mind.
Yeah, completely agree. And I would include trustee boards in this as well. I think trustee boards are a team. I don't think they often conceptualize themselves as a team, and I think that creates issues. So I think a framework like this,
interesting one.
Yeah, I think a framework like this, you're absolutely right. So, we're working with a social housing provider. They have 90 staff. I think that chief exec, when he talks about teams, I think he means everybody, or 90 people. More likely, we might be working with organizations that have 15 staff, might have 6 staff, and it'll certainly apply across those kinds of scales. But I agree, it could also, we have another framework for collaboration, which perhaps brings other things in, but I think any team embarking on any endeavor together would probably benefit from contemplating these dynamics and doing some work around them. I think it's just to do with how, the depth of work you're doing together, how long you're working together, what it is you're working on. There's something about how you apply the thinking to your team. So if it's a short task and finish team, you might kind of dip your toes in, have some awareness of it, use them as a kind of checklist. If you're a kind of long-term sort of big multi-year kind of established team, you're likely to be going deeper into areas of the framework and do more work around things like emotional intelligence or whatever else. So I think it's a really good point, Alex. So yeah, I think it's all of that. I think probably often the classic distinction with teams is the difference between a team and a group, isn't it? So I think whenever people come together, so I think a group might just be a bunch of people hanging out together. I think a team is there with a shared purpose and a goal, and working towards that shared purpose and a goal. And that might be within an organisation, might be the whole organisation, might be a trustee board delivering effective governance, might be, as you say, a task and finish kind of people coming together from different places. Thanks for that clarity, Alex. So I think shared purpose and goals, obvious. I think the thing I would add to that within organisations is I would extend that created together. I think that's the bit that doesn't often happen and can be challenging in bigger organisations. I get it. But I think the more that purpose and those goals or objectives, or however you're kind of describing those things in your organisations for sort of performance management, that resource allocation, that type of stuff, I think the more they can be created together, the more ownership that can be within the team, the better, really. I think what's up against us with that stuff is it feels like it takes more time, can't get people together, I'm on a deadline, trustees are expecting this by then, but I think we've got to really strive to do I suppose I'm particularly thinking about strategic planning processes, which we facilitate a lot of, start early enough to make it as inclusive as possible. Start late and rush at it and end up doing it over the weekend at home. Okay, you'll get a plan with some goals and some objectives, but you're probably not going to get the best out of the team if they don't see themselves in the plan and don't feel like them. So I think that's an obvious thing, but I think if you're running on traditional year ends, I'm doing one on Saturday. I think it's away day season. September, October is a great time to get everybody together and do loads of big picture thinking, develop those ideas in the autumn through to maybe January, something like that, get them in front of board. So give yourself that kind of 6 to 9 month period for something like a strategic plan. Appreciate we're not just talking about strategic plans here, but it's a good example of purpose and goals and buy-in and sort of ownership and things. Things I'm going to focus on too sound very, very familiar, so I'm just going to mention them again. EQ. Mm-hmm. So moving beyond self, emotional intelligence, we need to have emotionally intelligent teams. We need teams that can self-regulate, that have empathy, in order to avoid the kind of drama that can otherwise start to happen and start to kind of distract us from our work. So engaging everybody in emotional intelligence, those concepts and those ideas, and really that commitment to understanding what's going on and how we bring our best to that work through that self-regulation. So
what are some of the ways that leaders can do that? So say if you're the chief exec of a small to medium charity and you've been on your course, for example, and you've learned about emotional intelligence, and you've kind of done it for yourself, and you want to introduce your teams to it and get them more aware of themselves and each other and stuff. Do people go off and, do the tools themselves and do some reading, or are there some what's the sort of things that people can do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when people come on our programs, that's the intention, that they're equipped, they're in leadership roles, and the course not only helps them with their own leadership development, but it gives them the kind of tools and knowledge and understanding to start to cascade that through their organisation. Not everybody does, because not everybody will feel confident, not everybody will be in that sort of position. But we have people who will, when we're focused on emotional intelligence, next time you see them, we did that with the team, and we've got lots of great insight from it, and we're now doing this and we're now doing that. So I think because it's been around a good while and because it's well developed. So when I did my first training in the early 2000s, it was a book written largely. There's a core text, isn't there? So it was mentioned, but I don't remember us doing any work on it. And there certainly weren't all the free resources that are available around EQ now. So I think it's that kind of skillfully bringing that, I've learned this, I think it's really interesting. What do you think? Can we get a bit of time together to have a look at it? Shall we all do the self-assessment? Let's share our kind of results. There's something about trust and safety in all of that, which is required. So that depends on the culture of your organisation, really. But that's that kind of bringing that skillful facilitation into the team. And there's something really powerful about not being an expert in this stuff and being learning yourself. So rather than saying, I've read the book, I understand this stuff, I've done the course, saying I've learned about this stuff, I find it really interesting. What do you think? I think being that kind of bridge for other people to kind of learn and engage. If you find it's interesting and you think it'd be helpful for your team, being that conduit, being that kind of bridge, facilitating those conversations and that little bit of work. If that, as an area, say our self-assessment for teams, these 10 areas, done as a team, should identify the areas that you want to work on. And if there are 2 or 3 areas, and one of those is emotional intelligence, then our learning resources and all the other resources which we'll put in the link with the podcast are things you can actually do. So self-assess, where are we at? What can we do? And then you embark, becomes part of what we'll talk about a bit later on, a kind of team development commitment, a theme, something that, we're working on over the next year. We're really interested in this. We're going to work on this. We're going to read around it a little bit. We're going to get together a couple of times. Lots of things you can do, I think. So my next repeat area is communication again. So I always imagine these things in deficit. So what's it like when we haven't created our purpose and goals together? What's this? I don't understand that. What are you asking me to do? You're probably going to get work to rule, minimum effort, bit disgruntled, not greatly motivating for people. What's it like if we don't have high levels of EQ? And I suppose what it's like if communication's poor. If we're all over the place with our communication, we're pinging things left, right, and centre. We don't really understand what they are. Hierarchies are in place. We're in trouble. And it's counterintuitive the busier we are to recognise the need to communicate more. Mm. It feels like we haven't got the time. Oh, you just do it. Oh, why don't they just do it? But we must. And if we don't, we've got to make that investment. We've got to find a way to make the time to communicate more effectively. And what we talk about in our programme, core skills, 3 things to focus on in communication: listening, really listening, really, really, really listening. Not waiting for you to make your point or to outsmart the person, really listening to understand. And that's both ways. Asking questions. Oh, could I just clarify that? Just explain that again. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. Would you mind? Could we have a coffee and just have it, asking questions and sort of seeking feedback? So listening, questions and feedback, kind of core skills around communication. So are we listening well? Are we asking questions to seek clarity? And are we providing feedback in order that we can sort of improve? I'd really appreciate or what would be helpful to me would be, or when you shared that with me like that, I found that a bit difficult to engage with. Would you mind next time doing that sort of feedback stuff? New area for teams, which what surprises, conflict and tensions, or tensions and conflict, or difference of opinion and tensions and conflicts, whatever spectrum we put on it, it'll happen. It's natural. Every framework around teams and around collaboration says it will happen. And I think, what do we do when it happens? We run for the hills. We respond with our fight, flight, freeze response, which is hardwired into us. We don't confront it. It needs confronting. We can't kind of work through it if it needs work through to find that kind of win-win. I think we really massively need to upskill around conflict within teams in order that it becomes a strength, a natural way of working, and not something that stresses us out all the time and kind of festers, I suppose. I think that's a really interesting area. So I'm a bit there. I think they're my kind of big hitting ones, but I've also put in fun. Let's have fun. Uh-huh. Fun. When we're doing these things, make them fun, make them engaging, have fun together. Enjoy, really massively motivating for people, smiling, kind of laughing, having fun together, even on away days, even when you're doing stuff that can feel quite dry, make it fun, make it engaging, enjoy it, facilitate it in that sort of way. People will contribute more. They'll go away feeling better. They'll be more motivated. It'll be part of our kind of culture, how we do things around here. You mentioned net. I'll just share this example. I've probably shared it with you before, but we have a little organising group. We have a WhatsApp group. And then we do most of our organising through the WhatsApp group. And we all have silly Bitmojis.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look through our WhatsApp messaging around organising North East Together Network for Social Change events, just hugely serious, purposeful occasions. It's just lots of fun. It's lots of playfulness, and it's lots of fun, and it's lots of enjoying the interactions with each other, and obviously not in appropriate ways, and by God, it's motivating, and you enjoy it, and it's really buoys you and really gives you the sort of energy you need to drive work that can be challenging, can be challenging and difficult, often challenging and difficult, this type of work.
Lots and lots of people, there's a distinct lack of fun in their kind of working lives, isn't there? And the lack of that kind of lightheartedness. There was something I wanted to ask about just when you're talking about some of those things around conflict, around sort of feedback and things like that. And that was just thinking about that sort of psychological safety. It's come up in a few conversations in one context or another. So I was wondering, is that sort of part and parcel of some of those things when you're talking to people about that kind of team environment and that sort of thing? Because you need to have that safety to be able to feel comfortable to give the feedback, don't you? And then, in terms of dealing with some of that conflict and tension and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think the psychological safety model appears in all three of our frameworks. So again, I think if you're working in collaboration, thinking about self or thinking about teams, I think those ideas that have been developed, much more recent work, isn't it? I think a lot of it came from sort of Google and big corporates. But there's some great stuff in there, and definitely stuff that we focus on newer, but kind of interesting. And again, you can do interesting psychological safety sort of free assessments, so you can get an understanding of what you need to feel safe in the workplace, as opposed to your colleague, as opposed to your next. So again, some lovely kind of quick to do learning about each other, about what I need to feel safe, psychologically safe in this environment in order to trust and, be vulnerable and be allowed to make mistakes. And yeah, so there's definitely a really good framework, good to have a look at and good to sort of explore with teams, and some great resources freely available around psychological safety, because it's a little bit zeitgeisty, isn't it? I'm not surprised it's sort of come up in other conversations. Good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's come up in a couple, I'm sure. Definitely. I was talking the other week to Ngozi, who you obviously know as well, as part of the network and been involved. I think she's probably involved in the coaching collective as well. We're having a conversation for the podcast around equity and diversity and inclusion. So obviously psychological safety was coming up in that, in terms of how people how organizations can explore that sort of issue with their teams. Okay, so we've done best self, great teams. We're going to leave collaboration to one side, at least for today. Otherwise, we'll be here for too long. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about smaller organizations and under-resourced organizations, maybe. Thinking about their resource, their ability to kind of invest in people development. And I suppose for organizations in general, for leaders, thinking about, how much should I be investing in people development, and, what can I spend it on? Lots of people kind of not mad about sending people on expensive training courses, because often it doesn't feel like you're necessarily getting value for money. There's sort of all sorts of different things you could spend it on. So yeah, let's get into that a little bit, thinking about that side of things. How can you make best use of the resource you've got, do you think?
Yeah, so I'll share some data which I've been having a bit of a look at, which I think is interesting, around sort of people, workforce development, headline data for people, which I think is relevant because it gives us a bit of a sense of scale. So this is about England and Wales. This is from Third Sector Trends, 2022, looking at employees, volunteers, diversity and investment in people. So kind of workforce scale, estimated at 1.1 million people. Interestingly, about 4.3 million volunteers. I guess in the Northeast, our context, what we're most focused on, and I guess the reason why we're most focused on it, because of these numbers, we've got about 8,000, what this report calls third sector organisations, which tends to be mostly charities, but also some social enterprises in there. Around 37,000 employees in the Northeast. And we estimate, should be data on this, there might be data on this, but I think we estimate there's about 20 to 30,000 trustees in the Northeast. So I guess, so I guess that's the kind of scale nationally, but also the scale regionally. So I guess there are sort of 37,000 people, even if we're just looking at employees in the sector. And I guess my curiosity is about what opportunities do they have for growth and development. And I think, sadly, and I'm happy to be corrected, I don't think very much. I think it's very, very scarce. So then some interesting other data, mixed interpretation of this data from the same report, talks about they'd use a language of investing in people, which of course sounds a bit familiar. They talk about 45% of all organisations, all TSOs in England and Wales having a training budget, so less than half. They separate training budgets from personal development. I've looked and looked and looked, and I can't see what the difference is. So with that caveat, because we wouldn't really see them as different, they talk about 53% of all organisations having sort of provision for personal development. I suppose this is the interesting thing for me. So 91% of the biggest third sector organisations, 91% have significant training budgets, whereas only 16% of what they describe as micro organisations, 16% have a training budget. And the space in between, so in that income, $250,000 to $1 million, it's about 84% of organisations have a training budget, dedicated training budget. When we get to 50 to 250,000, it's about 65%. So there's clearly something going on here, whereby the smaller you are, the less likely it is that you have resources for training and personal development. I don't think we'd be hugely surprised by that. Might that tell us that bigger organisations know they need to invest in more people? One other quote, Alex, before you asked me another question, which I think is interesting, related to the work, much of the work that you do. There's also a quote in there which says that organisations which invest more heavily, so I guess those bigger ones, generally are more successful at increasing income.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats are definitely really interesting. I think there's, like, as you'll know, there'll be loads of nuance within that as well, because of those that have training budgets, there were training budgets and then there were training budgets. So, I mean, if you think about the numbers of staff as well, like there'll be a good proportion of that staff that are kind of frontline workers, whether in maybe like social care providers, housing associations and things. They will have like mandatory statutory training that they have to do. So there'll be a training budget for that. Now, that is not the same as, having the space to think about emotional intelligence and how you communicate with people and all of those sorts of things. So, there's loads of stuff to unpick there as well in terms of what different organisations in the sector are investing in training. And of course, there'll be differences. Lots of organisations, they might send their senior leadership team on those sorts of courses where you think about emotional intelligence, but then like the other 90% of the workforce are not getting that. They're getting health and safety training and safeguarding training and things like that, which, obviously important in their roles, but, they're not necessarily getting that kind of same development opportunity.
And I wonder whether it's the personal development data. I need to dig into this a bit more. And I have scanned the whole document for a definition of what they mean by personal development versus training. Might be a very simple answer to that, and I'm just being daft. Similar data. So biggest 93%, the middle bunch 250 to $1 million, 89%. So similar, the statistics kind of broadly look the same. And I assume when they talk about personal development support is generally regarded as a vital aspect of organisational development in its people. So I'm assuming in here there's more of the type of stuff that we're talking about today. Mm. As you say, less of the sort of statutory type stuff. But even in the long form report, I need to ask somebody what they're grouping up into there. I need to get a little bit below the data to understand that a bit better. But I think there's a broad picture, which wouldn't surprise us, which is the bigger we are, the more turnover we have. Some point we've probably got like HR dedicated staff. We've probably got like OD dedicated staff. There's a sort of scale thing going on, isn't there, where an organisation gets to a certain scale, rather than juggling all these kind of organisational roles, you start to separate them out because your workforce is at that point where you need, a people development person, you need kind of somebody focused on culture and all those types of things. So it's not. But I think it tells a story, and I know talking to Stephanie about this, we also wonder with the smaller ones, much more project funding based, hard to secure people development money when actually the money's coming through a project. And I know there's some exceptions to that with the way the National Community Fund supports through the Grants Plus and other funds as well, so it's not entirely the case, but I just wonder whether there's less restricted funding in the mix for smaller organisations. That it's much less hard to ring fence resources for people development, for investment in people.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. So, I mean, I know it's really difficult to generalise, but I'm going to ask you to anyway. So, I mean, and you can caveat for different sizes of organisations, I guess, but when you're thinking about people development budgets, I'm sure you've said before, you've got a kind of a bit of a guideline of like percentage of turnover you might want to set aside for that. So it'd be interesting to kind of share that with people, and also just how might people think about structuring that budget once they've got their X percentage. Okay, we've got this amount of money. You know, what are some of the things that you think are good things to invest in, or how you might think about how you might utilise that budget?
Yeah, so 3 things to cover here, if it's helpful. So number 1, how to resource it. Not everything costs money, but some things do. Secondly, how to allocate that resource once you've managed to ring fence it and defend it, which hopefully as a senior leader or as a chief executive, you have authority to do if you choose to. And then what I've called a little bit jargony, sort of typologies of investment. So we've ring fenced the resource. We've thought about how we kind of allocate that, and then we're actually doing the sort of allocation of it. We're thinking kind of imaginatively about the kind of range of things that might help people grow and develop, be effective in work. So in terms of the how to resource it, yes, for a number of years now, I suppose based on my experience of being a chief exec and speaking to other chief executives, it seemed to me that those organisations that were doing this well seemed to be spending about 3% of their turnover on it. So if you turn over 100,000, you might have £3,500, 250, 7.5, 500, 15,000, etc. It seems like organisations that are doing it well are spending that, like something like that. They're allocating something like that in their budgets. So I suppose a shorthand for that is 3% for people. So now there's something in here, a caveat I put in there is this sort of assumes that most of your kind of turnover cost is your salaries, which in most organisations is true. If you happen to be an organisation like a social housing provider where big chunks of your budget are to do with capital, you'll clearly need to take a different view. But I think if you're that majority of organisations where typically about 80% of your turnover is salaries, quite typical, that 3% for people, what have we got in our budget lines? What have we got in our annual budgets? Where does it sort of sit alongside that? So I think 3% for people is a good aspiration. And then obviously trying to leverage it and match it up. It was easier than it is today. But you might find it's hard, I think, today to kind of match funding for this type of work harder than it was, to be honest, pre-austerity. It would be kind of easier to put some money in and to be supported by a kind of easy access sort of support fund in the region that would double your money. So if you can, great. But at least if you've got that sort of baseline. How to allocate it? Dead obvious, I think. You'll note today I'm not talking a lot about volunteers. It's not an area of expertise of mine. So apologies for that, because volunteers are obviously part of the very much part of the workforce, and for some organisations a huge part of what they do, less so for others. So you won't hear me talking about volunteers much because it's less. I've just got far less knowledge and experience around that. I'll leave those sort of expert organisations to do that. So how to allocate resources? 3 areas, dead obvious, but 3s are quite handy, aren't they? I think I would think about kind of individual development activity, maybe a couple of things in there, probably identified through appraisal and supervision if you're using those processes well. So we've identified some development areas for the next year. Okay, I'm looking to do this, this, and this. If the short courses or short interventions and the low cost, hopefully you'll be able to feel like you can fully fund that. If the longer programs, higher cost, perhaps qualification based, I remember supporting people to do kind of higher level degree study. You might look at making a contribution. You might look at also kind of bonding schemes. So if the person leaves within a year, they pay something back, that type of stuff. So I suppose there's that kind of individual, identifying individual development areas, then moving into team development activity. So we've talked about what that might be. We might bring somebody in to do a bit of EQ work to get us started. Who knows? So again, based on identified areas. We could use something like our toolkit to self-assess what those things are and say, okay, well, our themes for the next year, we're going to do some work on communication, we're going to do some work on conflict, we're going to have a look at EQ, and over the next 12 months, they're the things we want to put a bit of time and energy into, where we have time and energy amongst our busy day jobs. Could be team away days. I love away days if they're facilitated well. I know not everybody does. I think that's probably because I've had bad experiences of them. So fantastic opportunities for learning and connecting and exploring and kind of moving forward in things. I think, again, massively dependent on type of organisations. I think teams in the organisations we work with, less than £1 million, I think they should have an annual away day as a team. Day, 2 days maybe, to refresh, to do some work, do some deep work, see whether they can kind of move away from the office for a day. I think that would be a good sort of rhythm to get into.
I think ideally something more regular. I think, and yeah, of course, like ideally, yeah, we'd do, X, Y, and Z. But I suppose even with stretched resources, I think part of the challenge that comes with those away days is the fact that it's only once a year. So then it's like, it's either focused on like strategy development and stuff, or like it's, cramming loads of stuff in, or it's just a fun day and then it's kind of like less intentional what you're getting out of it. Like if you were doing something, if it was like a half day on a quarterly basis, then you've got like more of a rhythm for coming together and doing things like that. And then that could be where you can then explore some of those things. Like you could spend some time on emotional intelligence and then follow that up with stuff that's built into your kind of existing schedule and routine. You could do another session on communications. You could kind of tackle different things at different ones and build in a bit of that sort of fun into it as well and things like that. And I think that could potentially work really well, as opposed to kind of trying to do those sort of single away days and things. But yeah, it's interesting. The resources, often it's the money's always tight, but often it's the time that's more difficult, isn't it? Like creating the sort of time and space to invest in these areas. And I think there's never spare time. So it is really another case of like, it's up to the leadership to say, we are committing to putting this time in, and and I suppose showing the importance of those things to the organisation and investing in their people, investing in those things like emotional intelligence. I think that's the biggest challenge in a way, isn't it? Is making the time, and that there will never be time available. And if it's always a kind of, well, when we get time to do it, when we're a bit less busy, then we'll do it. It will never happen. So it's having to really, really kind of be intentional and make that kind of decision at a senior level and make the decision to invest the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I wasn't suggesting for a moment, but the only thing a team would do in any 12 months is have an away day. I think it's useful to do some deep work at some point in the year is what I would say. But if a team, say, for example, wanted to do some work around conflict and tension, communication, emotional intelligence, it's then a program. It's what does that look like across the year? What does that look like for us individually? So it's definitely not a message around, once a year we do this, the rest of the year we're not paying any attention to it. I just think there's a nice rhythm in annual. I suppose those longer sessions, if facilitated well, and that's the key, I think, allow for kind of deeper engagement, deep work alongside what might be, shorter sessions. You can do it. I think that's up to those in the position of kind of making those things happen to sort of determine what's appropriate for the team, what we can afford, how much time we can spend on it, those types of things. And you're right, we're always up against the backdrop of being time. We're time poor in the sector, absolutely. And you're right, I think that's a far bigger issue than, having a few £100 to attend this course or that course. It's the cost of being out of the office, out of the work, away from the work from that period of time, which feels even harder to make a reality.
Yeah, I guess it depends on size of teams and stuff like that as well, doesn't it? 'Cause if you're a bigger organisation, then of course, like half a day, if you're all together, you're not going to get very far with much. Whereas if you're a smaller team, kind of up to 20 people, then you can get quite a lot done in that sort of 4-hour slot.
Yeah. And I'll be always most of my experiences are smaller charities. So what I don't have experience of, with a few exceptions, is the big charities with hundreds of staff. Our day job is 1, 3, 6, 15 staff, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
I guess that's the because I guess that's where we focus our attention, because our view is that, and I guess the data's backing it up a bit, that's where people have least opportunity to access things like coaching or other things. I suppose that's part of our kind of mission, really, is to address that gap and be completely blindsided to how the big ones go about this stuff, and not disinterested, but certainly disinterested in terms of our energy and our work. I don't see our work being a great fit for them necessarily, if you see what I mean, because it comes from this. And at the end of the day, the vast majority of the sector is small. It's something 96% turns over less than £500,000. So the sector is small generally. Obviously, we have some big organisations in but it's far less.
And I suppose I suppose in general, the very large organisations, they have in-house resources to do a lot of this sort of stuff, don't they? So they don't really need, they might still get some facilitators in for some of those kind of off-site sessions and things like that, but they should have those sort of organisational development people that can drive some of those programmes, covering the topics that we've talked about. So still needing to look at those sort of same topics, but they have, have the resources to do it on a larger scale, because that's, they're working at that scale. They've got that number of people.
That's right. Just to finish my third area, obviously, board trustee development activities. I suppose if we've ring-fenced our 3% and we're thinking about assigning it, I'll be thinking about making sure that, and I don't know whether it's quotas or percentages and flexibility with those things, but I would just be making sure that it's a mix of individual investment in individuals, investment in team development, and investment in the board and trustee group. And some flexibility there, but kind of consciously making sure that we think, and obviously if you have a lot of volunteers, I think that would be a fourth. So it could be percentages, could be quotas, but we've got our 3%, we've got our kind of 3 areas of focus. And then I could just mention some things that I think great investments to make, the type of things that you might kind of think about when you are going to spend some of that money, as opposed to the things you can do yourself internally. Yeah,
I think the question around the board investing in people there and individuals and as a team and stuff is a really interesting one, but I'm not going to take us down that rabbit hole, because I know we're working towards sort of wrapping up time now anyway. But it's probably another episode on the big sort of challenge and opportunity for the sector in terms of boards. So did you want to mention some of the specifics, did you say?
Yeah, just briefly, and it's a bit of a list, I suppose, but I guess just to finish that off, we've ring-fenced our 3%. We've kind of got these 3 areas that we're going to invest in, and then we're thinking about what we might be doing. So I suppose it's making sure we've got our eyes up and seeing what's available. I'm obviously going to mention coaching and mentoring for individuals, but also for teams, kind of really interesting. Encouraging people to join action learning sets, or for teams forming action learning sets, or training as facilitators of action learning sets, so you can do it internally. We do quite a bit of that. Obviously, there's taking part in what we call CPD activity, so that could be all sorts of things, short courses, dropping into things, kind of longer term things. I think opportunity to attend conferences and events, I think important for individuals potentially. And I say lots of things we can also do that aren't money going out the door, really. And I suppose supporting people to do reflection, kind of watching podcasts and videos, doing reading, maybe work shadowing. So lots of things that sit alongside this. We have a little bit of a framework for this, which positions stuff that you might need to pay for alongside all the things that you can do without incurring a cost. And I guess it's kind of mixing those things together for an individual in a way, or for a team in a way that kind of works across their next year based on their priorities. So I think boards, slightly different application. I do like away days for boards. It tends to be what we go for. They're very time poor again. I think getting the board away for every couple of years is quite good, depending on your size of organisation. Every year might be a bit much. Lots of great self-assessment tools out there for boards to really identify where they're doing really well and identify where they want to strengthen. And, some resources, available to organisations to think about what that might be, what might that involve. And the same rules apply to that conversation we had about the team. It's not just the away day. It's what are we doing across the year? What's the board doing across the year? What are the areas that we're working on? We might identify them at away day, and we might embark over the next 12 months on doing some activity around that. So yeah, I guess we also thinking about scales is interesting. Maybe that's a bit of a repetition, but I suppose that kind of individual to team to whole staff team to kind of board to whole organization's a useful spectrum to kind of have in mind when you're making these investments. And I guess you're just making sure that you're allocating your resource in some way using some sort of sensible formula or percentages, that you're not just thinking, as you talked about earlier, Alex, this isn't just about compliance training or health and safety. It's actually about people. It's about teamwork. It's about the stuff that we've talked about today, which is important to all the people in our organisation, and especially if we're going to work well together and drive our purpose and our work.
Yeah, you've said there's a whole bunch of resources that we can share, so we'll get those on the webpage, get those links there. If you've got PDFs or anything, we can stick those on there as well. Anything final you want to say before we go?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there's lots of stuff. I'll have a look at how you share that stuff with listeners, and we'll spend a bit of time kind of pulling together some material that relates to what we've been talking about today. So hopefully people will find that of interest. You asked me whether I wanted to promote anything or request anything. So if you happen to be based in the Northeast, you might want to look to join Northeast Together. We'll put links in for that. If you're looking for affordable coaching and you're working in the Northeast voluntary community social enterprise sector, have a look at the Northeast Coaching Collective. And we do run a couple of open leadership and management development programs a year, which are really designed to be affordable and strike the balance between, enough time to do some good learning together, but not so much time that people can't commit to it. So that's a 3-day program, slightly shorter days with a half day at the start and a half day at the end. Next one starts next week, but we run those in spring, summer, and kind of autumn, winter every year. My request, if anybody feels minded to, I'm not sure how you distribute this, whether you're using LinkedIn or whatever, I'd be curious if you wanted to, in 3 things, what's your annual budget for team, for what we've been talking about, for people development, I think is what I would broadly call it. So what's your annual budget? How do you allocate this? And what type of things do you typically invest in, and why those things? So, yeah, it'd be interesting to hear whether we can gain some insight from people. That'd be great.
Yeah, good stuff. Definitely recommend all of those bits that Rob promoted. As I said, the network's fantastic. If you're in the Northeast, really enjoyed being a part of that. Benefited from the coaching with one of the coaches. Can definitely recommend that. And I know I've not been on Rob and Stephanie's training, but I know from seeing them facilitate sessions and from seeing the sort of work that they produce, and from seeing these frameworks and talking through Rob today, I'm very confident in recommending that as well. So to answer Rob's few questions, Rob Laycock on LinkedIn. Probably can find contact details as well on the Yes We Can community websites. And I think that's probably everything for us for today. So if you've made it all the way to the end, thanks for listening. Thanks, Rob, for your time. It's been great. So yeah, until next time, take care.
Thanks, Alex.